Welcome to our subscription video for February 2022. Today we're going to be talking about the 3 coffees that you'll be receiving in your subscription box this month. And we've got some really special coffees planned for you. So I'll let Alex talk about our first coffee.
All right, we're going to kick it off. Let me pour some for you here.
Yeah.
We're going to kick it off with a coffee that we have a pretty wonderful relationship with this producer. It's one of the few coffees that we bring in direct trade here at Subtext. We've worked with the Castro Caleb family now for 2 years in a row, and being 2.5 years old, that's would be our longest standing relationship. They are located near the Poas volcano in West Valley of Costa Rica. Alejo Castro, he is now 5th generation, I believe, coffee producer out of Costa Rica, and is innovating kind of immensely in the Costa Rican coffee scene through processing, through varietal selection and breeding. We're going to start with what is a little bit more of a conventional Costa Rican coffee, but really done well. This is a 100% caturra variety, and you see caturra quite a bit in Costa Rica. I think we haven't seen, as a roastery, too many Costa Rican coffees, so this is kind of a singular relationship for us that is really important. And so much of our project, we care about tasting and experiencing coffees from so many regions, just to kind of wrap our heads around that regional representation. And so we find it super important to not just taste the crazy coffees that some of these producers make, but this caturra really is kind of indicative of, I guess, here's the one thing that maybe strays from conventionalities. I think when a lot of people think Costa Rican coffee, they think honey process. And I don't know, do you know what the split would be in terms of processing in the country?
I don't know, but I do know that honey processing has taken off in Costa Rica over recent years, and it seems to make up a huge portion of what we see in consuming countries at the moment.
Yeah, and honey processing adds a step towards flavor depth that you would find in natural coffees, but without a lot of the fruit. And so you can maybe get a bit of fruit, maybe a bit of white or yellow fruit, but it's not often a lot of that big juicy red fruit that you get in a natural coffee. But anyway, this coffee is not honey processed. This coffee is washed, and it tastes like it. This coffee is really clean. It still is kind of, it still has some of that nuttiness that you would expect from kind of a white or yellow honey process coffee from Costa Rica, but maybe a little bit less of the muddiness in the cup, maybe a little bit less fruit and more of that kind of sticky toffee, praline, maybe a bit of milk chocolate. What do you find in the cup?
I definitely agree, and this is the 2nd year in a row that we've had this, and while it has all those comforting, warm notes, this year's also does have a pretty defined fruit characteristic that kind of reminds me of dried apricot, dried stone fruit that is it's really nice.
Yeah, I would probably say that this is a coffee that everyone would like. It's definitely not going to be a divisive coffee. It might not deliver the hit you over the head fruit that some people look for. It doesn't have a super vibrant acidity. It's very balanced. It's very mellow. It's really enjoyable. It's kind of a wonderful first thing in the morning cup of coffee, but still flavorful. I think sometimes coffees like this can lack flavor articulation, and so they will be pleasant. People will say they're oh, this coffee's good first thing in the morning or something, but they won't taste like much. They'll just have coffee taste. But this doesn't. This has layers of flavor, and so we really appreciate it for that reason. Do you want to bring us to our next coffee, which is going to be a bit of a departure in the flavor department here?
For sure. So our second coffee, while it's a departure in the flavor department, it is actually the exact same coffee variety as the first Volcan coffee in the box, and this is a washed caturra from Huecaso Nariño in Colombia from a producer named Luis Rodriguez. And we first tasted pre-shipped samples of this coffee back in September, and it really blew our minds like right away on the cupping table. And we knew as soon as we tasted it that this was a coffee we wanted to bring in. And while it is a washed caturra, like the first coffee in the box, it's actually processed a little bit differently. It has an extended in-cherry fermentation to start the process. So after the coffee is picked, it's actually left full cherry in the bags that the coffee was picked in a cool environment for 72 hours, which adds a certain amount of intensity and deep, complex fruit characteristics. And this coffee is also grown at a pretty astounding 2,200 meters above sea level, which you can really taste in the cup.
Yeah. This cup is, it's crazy.
It is.
It's completely crazy.
Yeah.
It is, it's insanely delicious. It's so flavorful. It has so much fruit expression, and it's not, I don't know what you find, but I find that to get this amount of intensity these days, we often see coffees, sure, we see it in Kenyan coffees, washed coffees, and we see it in some Ethiopian coffees, but it's pretty rare to get that level of acidity, fruit intensity, cleanliness, and then matching sweetness out of washed coffee.
For sure.
And so it's kind of mind-blowing. And it's not the case that it's just a washed, we've had natural coffees over the last season that taste a little bit like washed coffees, and washed coffees that start to taste a little bit like natural coffees for some of the processing reasons that, Jamal, you were alluding to. But this isn't not that. It's like a really loud coffee that is still like sparklingly clean. It shows, I get tons of grapefruit.
For sure.
I put it to your nose, and before you even can taste it, you're completely distracted because you can smell so much grapefruit, so much savory fruits. How would you describe the actual flavor?
Like, yeah, you get some savory fruits like tropical, like tamarind. I get some pomegranate and something that reminds me of kiwi as well.
Yeah.
It's very complex and has seemingly unending layers of fruit.
So cool, so interesting. Wow. And right to the finish, like it has a little bit of bitterness, but it's not that kind of like over extracted bitterness.
For sure.
And it's not roast bitterness. It's like a grapefruit bitterness.
Yeah.
So current, like it's really integrated into the rest of the flavor. So it ends up being really pleasant in the same way that if you like grapefruit juice or if you like currants, that kind of flavor is really pleasant.
Definitely.
This is really exciting, really interesting, and really spectacular when it comes to talking about varietal expression. Because, wow, do those two coffees ever taste different?
Yeah, very different.
How you end up asking yourself, what is the commonality between these two coffees? And I mean, Colombia and Costa Rica are, regions in Colombia are vastly different. Forget about Costa Rica and Colombia are two very different, distinct countries. But it's not like we're talking about Kenya and Costa Rica. But that's what it tastes like, to be honest with you.
Really, yeah.
Which maybe is an interesting segue into our next coffee. Okay, this is a really special one for all of the 3-bag subscribers. 3 bags or more, they're going to get this coffee. Now this is really special. And so we've had 2 coffees so far that's the same variety. And now we're going to have a coffee that is from the same farm, same producer, the Castro family in Costa Rica and West Valley, but of a different variety, and a very special variety. We just talked a lot about grapefruit, and we talked about currant, we talked about savory fruit, and what does that remind you of?
Definitely of Kenya.
Yeah, those are like very Kenya characteristics. And the question is, what does that mean? When a coffee tastes Colombian or a coffee tastes, we actually tend to be somewhat dismissive of saying a coffee tastes like a country, because countries are extremely complex, regionalized, and even you can atomize them further down to the producer.
Definitely.
Because producer to producer coffees can taste completely different, even if it is the same variety. Luis Rodriguez being a great example of that. But in trying to define what that Kenyan profile is, where caturra maybe didn't shine through as much, processing, terroir maybe made a bit of a bigger impact. I would wager to say that SL28, one of the varieties in Kenya, is one of the louder varieties, one of the more coffee-defining varieties out there. Like, what else would you say? Geisha, Pacamara.
For sure.
I think some of like mocha is a pretty defined variety that you can really taste through different expressions. And SL28 is definitely that. And it tastes like Kenyan coffee. I think one of the most distinctive characteristics of SL28 is its acidity.
Yeah.
It is electric. It's so vibrant. And you see that across Kenyan coffees. However, acidity that's really loud, it can turn some people off, but it really only turns people off when it's not balanced with other structural components like sweetness and bitterness. And SL28 tends to deliver all of it. It's like everything is elevated and it creates such an exciting, interesting taste profile. Even just when you smell this coffee, it smells so much like grape juice. Like it's so purple smelling, if that makes any sense. Very grapey, lots of berry. How would you describe the aroma?
Yeah, purple makes a lot of sense, and like just specifically dark berry, blackberry, and really even blackberry jam.
Yeah.
Like very, very sweet.
It's very confectionery.
Yeah,
It
absolutely.
almost has like a bit of a candy taste, not in terms of artificiality, but in terms of just like I think we're not used to the level. Well, it's like when blueberries are peak season, you know, and you can taste the blueberry and it doesn't actually smell like anything because of, what we call phenolic ripeness. They can be sweet potentially, but if they're not phenolically ripe, if the skins and the seeds aren't ripened really well, which is to say very slowly, generally, you don't get all of those aromatic components.
Right.
And coffee is just seed, so phenolic ripeness is kind of everything. And yeah, what you get is with blueberries, I was going to say, is like when they're really ripe, is tons of aroma, tons of flavor, and that's what this is like. Blackberry, blueberry, plum. There's a bit of a grapefruitiness to it, not like the ruby grapefruit that we got in Luis Rodriguez, but really excellent coffee.
Yeah.
Really delicious. So this is one of many varieties. I don't know if I'm going to remember this number correctly, but I believe 17 varieties that the Castro Calle family grow on their farm in West Valley. And we've had the pleasure of tasting many of them. We've selected alone this year 7 different expressions. Not all different varieties. I think we've doubled up on one.
Yeah.
Doubled up on one of the varieties that you'll see which one later. But we get 6 different varietal expressions from the same producer, and we've tasted, because when we taste Alejo's coffee every year, we get to taste a lot of them, a lot more. We don't buy every one of them. We buy the ones that we think make the most sense for us, the ones we identify with, the ones obviously we think are really delicious, and they're all different. And these are 2 really profound examples, of. Some people might think like, wow, if you just taste variety, if you just taste processing, like, what does that term terroir mean anymore? And it means a lot. It means that's what it means. Terroir is the singularity of any expression of coffee, and it could be what variety is processed and or what variety is grown, I should say, and how it's processed. And in the case of Luis Rodriguez, it has to do with what happens to caturra when it's planted at 2,200 meters above sea level. Literally an altitude that most producing regions in the world can't grow coffee at because it's too high. It's above the frost line, and coffee plants won't survive. And we saw that with geisha. We saw that with what happened when the Petersons planted geisha high up. They got last place in the Best of Panama competition at low altitude and went straight to the top of that ranking when they planted that at a higher altitude. And so altitude is profound. I mean, it's just that all of these things kind of come together, whether it's processing or variety, to create an experience. We completely forgot to talk about one super important, talking about processing, super important aspect that makes this SL28 so different than Kenyan coffees, apart from being continentally different.
Yeah.
It's also processed completely differently. We would, I don't know, I would say probably incorrectly, put this processing and, you know, double washed Kenyan processing at like opposite ends of the spectrum.
For sure.
People like to think of like washed, semi-washed, natural, anaerobic. I don't think that that's, as we've seen with Luis, as we've seen what happens when you in-cherry ferment, washed coffee isn't like some uniform processing method. So we should chat about anaerobic processing.
Yeah.
Now, this coffee is naturally processed anaerobically. So you basically, you are putting this coffee in a tank and putting it in full cherry, so you're not taking the skin off, what we call depulping. You put it in a tank, you flush out the oxygen with carbon dioxide, similar to what you'd see in Beaujolais with carbonic maceration, and you let the cherries ferment in that environment. And what that tends to do is facilitate the growth of a very different microbiology that would ambiently be doing the fermentation if you were to not do it in an anaerobic environment. Mainly lactic and acetic acid bacteria. And what those bacteria do is really elevate kind of some of the fruit qualities, fruit aromas, and acidity of the coffee. And you know, we already said that SL28 is an elevated, has elevated acidity. And so that elevates it even a little bit more. But again, somehow this coffee is still balanced.
Yeah.
It's so sweet and has so much great structure. So that's really fun. Very good. Wow. 3 super different coffees. Thanks so much for watching February's coffee subscription video. If you want to learn more about the Volcan Azul coffees, that's a farm of the Castro Calle family, we have a video up on our website. We also have it up on Vimeo and YouTube that you can check out. It's a conversation between me and Alejo, and he goes a lot deeper into their practices, their beliefs in environmental stewardship, their philosophy about processing and growing varieties, and just many of the ways they're so innovative in the coffee world. We enjoy the coffees.